morning, everybody.
I would not say you don't remind me of
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kate O'Connor, and I'm from Building a Better Brattleboro. And I want to take an opportunity to thank everybody who is here today, as well as everybody who took part in the last 3 days. We had some great meetings. We had a community meeting on Monday night, which I recognize a lot of you from. Property owners came out. It was great. We had merchants who came out. We had members of the community who were involved in nonprofit organizations come out. And I think, and wonderful consultants here are going to give us a little report. But I just want to say, as part of BaBB, thank you, everybody, because this process couldn't have been successful without the help of the community. And I think the next step is all of us coming together as a community and implementing some of the ideas and suggestions. So not only I will thank you, but I'll also thank the consultants who worked really hard over the last 3 days, and as I understand it, we'll be coming back. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to them.
Good morning, everyone. Forgive the coffee in my hand. It proves positive. I do shop local and independent. For those who don't know me, my name is Leanne Tingay, and I coordinate the Vermont Downtown Program through the Agency of Commerce through the Division of Community Planning and Revitalization. And like Kate, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come here this morning and hear basically what you told us back at you. And then afterwards, you will have a chance to have a few comments, ask questions, and so forth. For those of you who have already heard this, forgive me. For those who haven't, as you know, this is for you, background. As you know, 2 years ago, we had just a little incident here. It was Tropical Storm Irene. And while perhaps not everyone in downtown was affected immediately by those floodwaters, I think everyone would agree that Tropical Storm Irene had an effect, just like the Brooks House fire earlier that same year had an effect. Well, we had an opportunity to take a look at how do we help communities, especially in the downtowns, that seems to be my purview, recover. And not just recover, how do we come back stronger and ready for the next challenge, whatever it may be, fire, flood, pestilence, fire from the sky, who knows. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we build ourselves back stronger? And what do we really want in our downtown and our community? So we were able to secure some funding through some community development block grant disaster recovery dollars. And with that, we were able to put together, well, our version of a dream team with some fresh eyes outside of Vermont from all around the country, but also some local Vermont perspective. So we felt like we had a good balance there. So with that, I would like to introduce who we're calling our team leader of the Vermont Downtown Action Team. His name is Kurt Muldrow. He's from Arnett and Muldrow out of South Carolina. But he and I have been working together in Vermont now for about 6-7 years. So he definitely gets Vermont, which has been a real benefit for us. And he'll be presenting, as well as other members of the team, what we have done, looked at, talked to, and again, thank you so much for your thoughts. Thank you so much for your comments. And this won't be the end. Now, the real task is going to be helping you guys look at this, strategize, and implement. I want to also introduce one other person, my colleague, Richard Amori, who is a planning coordinator in our same division, Community Planning and Revitalization, who has just been instrumental in coordinating between the state and on the ground and the consultants. So thank you, Richard. So with that.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. I'm going to caution my team and you all. I'm going to stand here because we're recording this for YouTube, and there's a microphone back in the back corner. So if you want to say anything nasty, I wouldn't do it right over there, because the mic will pick it up. I want to extend a very warm thank you to Kate and your team at BaBB for putting this week together. The attendance has been incredible. We have been so pleased with all the turnout and the quality of the input. We had a full slate of interviews, a full schedule while we were here, and the team, I hope you will see, has done a tremendous amount of work in a very short amount of time. And with that, I'm really proud to introduce my teammates on this project. Several of them almost all of them are here in the room. Laz Skangas and Heather Fontaine. They're with Arnold and Skangas Architects out of St. Albans. I've known Laz for many years, and Heather and I have been working with the team in the other communities in Vermont. I have Nate Scott and Tom McGilloway with Mahan Reichel Associates out of Baltimore, Maryland. Tom's also worked here in Vermont with me in the past, and has worked all over the country. We worked in Wyoming and in the deep south post-Katrina and other places. Also pleased to have with me Stacy Payer and Stephanie Francis from South Coast Consulting. Stacy and Stephanie experienced disaster and disaster recovery firsthand, dealing with all the communities along the Mississippi Gulf Coast who experienced not only Hurricane Katrina, but also the BP oil spill following that. So as you might imagine, having a double whammy yourselves here, they definitely know what a double dose of disaster in downtowns can do. Last but certainly not least is Randy Wilson. Randy's with Community Design Solutions. He lives just down the road from me in Columbia, South Carolina, the hottest place on earth, except for Brattleboro today. Thanks for bringing the weather with you, Randy. Randy is the state architect for Mississippi and South Carolina, but he works all over the United States with state architects in the Main Street program on doing things. You're going to see some of his skills today as well. One person who's not with us, who's also on our team, is David Boehm. David worked closely and will continue working closely with us on engineering-related issues, particularly things like parking, condition of parking lots, and strategies as we move ahead. There's a lot of detail work that's going on that I'm not going to get into the weeds with you today, because quite frankly, we have a lot more exciting and fun things to talk about, but trust that all the detailed stuff is also going on. I have an excruciatingly detailed memo from David on parking resources and conditions throughout downtown to help advise the town of Brattleboro on how it works through its capital budget to maintain parking and keep that a vibrant part of the overall equation here in downtown. One of the things that just my role in starting out is doing some update to the market analysis. We worked with you all in 2010, so certainly I've been to Brattleboro many times. Back in 2010, in October, we worked with merchants to do customer zip code surveys. This was past peak foliage season. We had 23 participants tally zip codes. They recorded almost 2,000 customer visits in 2010, representing 443 unique American zip codes, 41 states, DC, 4 provinces, 7 foreign countries, and 2 top secret military installations. And this is an incredible dynamic, and certainly it is October, and we have to be careful about this. But this puts Brattleboro in the top 10% of the over 200 communities we've ever done a market study in as far as breadth of customers. The only other places that where we've worked that have exceeded you all is Burlington on Church Street Marketplace. They managed to cobble together all 50 states, including North Dakota. And trust me, if you can get a North Dakota, you're in good shape. And then Ocean Springs, Mississippi, along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, and then a couple communities in western North Carolina, which you know is a major tourism destination adjacent to Asheville. So it really is a testament to the kind of downtown that Brattleboro is, that you had the breadth of visits that you had at this point in 2010. At the end of the day, though, it's really important to see on this slide that even in October, on the heels of foliage season, that 42% of the customers in those businesses in downtown recorded a 05301 zip code. It's imperative and critically important that this downtown continue to serve the local population base, which it indeed does. We acknowledge, and I know you've heard this, folks, I don't go downtown anymore. Well, the data begs to differ with that information. There are locals who go downtown. They comprise the most significant component of that. You see Putney, your neighbor, another 8%. They're here. Vernon, Hinsdale, Wilmington, Marlboro, 2% apiece. Other area zip codes are 8%, and then we put in the rest of Vermont, and we basically get to about about a quarter, a little bit less than a quarter, 23%. Of the customers come from Vermont and the immediate sort of surrounding area. That 7% varies a bit because we've got folks that will come down here from, away. They're doing that trip and they're stopping in as well. And then you see the rest of Massachusetts, the rest of New Hampshire, Connecticut, other states, other countries. That's representing a little bit over about 1 in every 4 customers is coming from away, from other places. And that's also significantly important, because if that were to evaporate, these retailers would evaporate as well. And so this is a dynamic downtown that does not have the luxury of just marketing to a single audience. It must, and so its luxury, in fact, is being able to market to multiple audiences and get the word out to them in an effective way and get that messaging that's going to resonate with a local customer, that's going to resonate with a regional customer, and certainly it's going to resonate with a visitor too. Using that data, we were defining trade areas. What's important, I don't want to get into a lot of detail on this or my team will shoot me, is that when we get into this, we look at visits per 1,000. You see the small communities like Marlboro and West Halifax start to jump up, ahead because they're so tiny. But go hug someone from Marlboro because they're the ones that come down most often in proportion to their population. These 3 zip codes are your primary trade area. All of these zip codes are your secondary trade area. It's very uncommon for me to see a broad area surrounding a community comprise its secondary trade area, and that is what's happening here in Brattleboro. Bear in mind, too, the Brattleboro zip code itself is quite a large zip code, and so you do get to stretch out into a hinterland that's fairly broad. We saw this happen in Rutland, where it was broad as well. As you might imagine, Rutland's sort of the center of a pretty rural area surrounding it. In St. Albans, you have a lot shorter break because you're so close to Chittenden County. So, again, when we compare this to other places, it gives us some interesting perspective. These zip codes then become the foundation of data research that we do. Your 2010 population, and this was interesting to see, it was projected to basically remain flat or slightly decline, and that's what happened in 2010. We didn't have access to the 2010 data, so it was an estimate at that point. It did exactly what the projection was. It increased by about 0.28%. It was expected to be 16,272 back when we did the study in 2010. The census actually gave you an additional 600 folks in the census reporting. So that's in those zip codes. So bear in mind that this is not the population of the town. This is the population of those 3 zip codes. However, the population is projected to decline. And I think we've known this. This is not a secret in the community. But the decline is actually expected to accelerate. It's an accelerated decline. And so that is an alarm bell. The asterisk here is put here on purpose because this projection of decline does not know, because projections have no knowledge about VY and the impact of that. And so that projection is actually probably going to be a conservative projection for decline. This is based on aging of population and past trends. And so it may be slightly higher decline than what these numbers are actually reflecting. It's very difficult to say at the end of the day. The median age, again, no surprise. New England is among the oldest. Maine and Vermont are among the oldest states in the Union. I think Maine is the oldest and you're the second oldest.
Yep.
The median age in Vermont is 41. The primary trade area median age is 45. And while I'm in my 40s, and I hate to say this, but 45 is very old for a median age, particularly when you look at the United States when it's 36.8. I was on the phone with my colleague. He was working in a community in the Deep South where the median age was 29. He said, I can't even believe it. They don't have a university or military base here. This place is nuts. And so to have 45 is an important consideration, and it's something that points to some of your strategies as you look at CEBEDS and the regional economic development and attracting young entrepreneurs and folks here back into the communities becomes critically important when we look at some of this stuff. Your median household income is $40,793. It's significantly lower than that for Vermont, and Vermont is about on par with that of the United States, a little bit higher than the U.S. It's interesting as we look at this median income, as we zoom out from the core of Brattleboro, that income begins to increase, and it increases fairly significantly. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. Also, we looked at wealth numbers, or basically, wealth is a little different than income, and it should come as no surprise to you all that wealth increases significantly as well. So people may not be making a lot of money, but as you move out into the hinterland around, they have a lot of money, tucked away. And so looking at that is an important piece as well. 1 in every 3 households in the 3 zip codes earns under $25,000 a year. That's an important thing to understand here, that we're dealing with a population that has distressed incomes. Now, having said that, there's 40% of the population that earns over $50,000 a year. So you also have a set of households that are of means and have disposable income. So, and then in between that, you take the 33 and 40, and that's the 25 to 50 gap there. When we look at this using psychographics, and I always say this does not measure the number of psychos in town, this just sort of takes it, begins to compartmentalize what all the demographic data looks like. This is 2010 data. This is not likely to change a whole lot, but you see things like midlife success. This is a younger population. They tend to do very well. Young achievers, that's about 1 in every 10 here. But then you see striving singles, 25%, 1 in every 4. These are folks that have families, young accumulators, mainstream families, about 9%. Sustaining families, these are folks that are struggling. The thing that, again, this chart reinforces is that red are folks that are older in their characteristic. Typically, their children are now out of the home. Again, with your age being 45, your median age being 45, this wheel in the United States of America is balanced a third, a third, and a third. Your wheel is about 40, almost 50% of that older segment. And you see this particular one, I'm sorry it's not labeled here, these are called affluent empty nesters. And that's about 4% of the population. I love these clever names they come up with. Conservative classics are slightly less affluent than the affluent empty nesters. And then you see cautious couples, and a very important category, sustaining seniors. These are folks with very limited means. They're on a fixed income, they're aging, and they really do need access to things and services. So this represents an important part of what we're looking at. Some amazing things happened when we updated your trade area statistics between 2010 and 2013. Your sales in this community declined. Now, I've got to put a big sort of caution on this, is that in 2010 we were dealing with dated data, and also we were dealing with the recession, which sent all of the analysts into a lot of roller coaster estimates on things. So take all this data with a grain of salt as we look at it. In fact, season it heavily with salt. But your sales did decline. I wasn't overly surprised by seeing a decline in sales. I was pleased to see that spending rebounded. And so what we're looking at is spending increased while sales declined. What was happening back in 2010 is you were importing about $141 million a year in sales coming in from outside of the 3 zip codes that comprise your primary trade area. Now that importation of dollars, and this is assuming that everyone's spending is spending their money here. We know that's not true. We know some are going to Keene to sneak over to Target, and other things like that. They're going across to Hinsdale. But the fact that you've closed this gap a little bit from 141 to 47, and actually, and economists always sort of, they're glass half full guys and glass half empty guys, but when I see a closing gap on retail gain, it represents that the market is actually getting, ripe for additional development, and we're actually seeing that sort of happen here. You're actually closing that gap. The locals are spending more. It gives more opportunity. None of this is counting the tourist traffic. None of this is counting that regional visitor. This is all just the locals. So closing that gap is really a good thing because it presents an opportunity for a tightening market and for new things to emerge here. And it's gaining in certain categories, and I'll show you a chart that'll blow your mind in a minute. The secondary trade area also saw an increase in sales. Bear in mind, this is very modest sales figures. And the secondary trade area, as you saw, Wilmington, very rural area. But we saw consumers fairly dramatically, again, commensurate with you all, their spending rebounded as well. The secondary trade area is leaking $96 million every year. And so when you gain 47, they leak 96, your overall market dynamic actually completely changed. Between 2010 and 2013, we put those numbers together, you actually become a market that's leaking sales. So you have an opportunity for additional stores to open up here, whereas when we combined 78 million and 141, you still were gaining sales. And so what this means for you is you sort of flipped in a very short amount of time, and the door is open now for additional development to happen, additional retail to thrive in the downtown area. But it means that you have to have sort of a concerted effort, an organized effort to do that. And certainly what we have too is an interesting counter trend where we've had space go offline during this time as well. So Brooks House was housing a significant chunk of retail. Flat Street had retail on it, and that retail disappeared between then and now. So it's an optimistic viewpoint that sort of counteracts some of the pessimistic viewpoint on your overall demographic trends. So you have to sort of look at that whole picture. I'm going to spend the next hour going through this chart. No, this is just to show you that I showed my fellow teammates that I work. We actually look at this by category, by ICS codes. Some of the things that are important is that your clusters that were strong in 2010 remain strong now. Even though you've had a decline in restaurants, you still are a dining importer. You're still a dining destination. And quite frankly, if you look at the region, people will come here to eat. Now, a lot of that's quick service dining that's happening out on the interchanges, but some of that's happening downtown as well. You're also a destination for sporting goods. Go give Pal a hug when you see him next time. But you're also leaking sales in a lot of categories as well. Things like clothing, which is fairly typical in a market like this. In fact, about the only market, and Richard and I were talking about this last night, where we see gain in clothing sales is where you have an outlet mall, and we really don't see that as a viable tool. When you're leaking sales in clothing, it does present an opportunity, particularly for a downtown, to have smaller, additional clothing stores that complement one another. Another category where you perform very strongly is in the home accessories category, which is the home furnishing accessories. And that's a really great category to be strong in. And we've seen a great rebound in that spending in that category, which basically got quashed in the recession. It was very interesting, strong upward trend post 9/11, and then the recession killed it because people were nesting after 9/11, and they were buying all kinds of things for the home. 2008 killed it, but we're seeing a rebound now as people want to sort of freshen up homes. So your spending dynamics really changed. Increased spending combined with declining sales. It flipped your market. I already said that. So your opportunities are strong. All that good news, of course, is tempered by the demographic data. So we have to be careful that we don't get overly enthused about it, because the demographic situation is an important and increasing challenge for this community. Your housing market. We're going to do a lot more work looking at the housing market But as a consequence of your population decline, one of the things that's going to continue to happen is an increase in vacancy of units here. 6.4% roughly right now. It's expected to be about 9.3% by 2018. A lot of that vacancy, when I tease out that data a little bit further, is happening in rental units. It appears that the homeowner occupancy level is going to remain fairly stable, but the rental unit vacancy rate is going to increase over time. And so that is an important consideration. And then the other thing that you all pointed out, and of course me being an outsider, I wanted to research it a little bit further, is the affordability factor here in Brattleboro. The income to mortgage payment ratio in Brattleboro increases the closer you get to downtown. So a median household income compared to the mortgage payment, they're paying 28% of their income for housing in a 5-minute drive time from High and Main Street. When you go up to a 20-minute drive time from High and Main, it's 24% of their income. Nationally, that number, pre the bubble, people were spending about 19% of their income on housing. Post-bubble, with low interest rates, people are spending about 12% of their income on housing across the nation. And so Forbes magazine is sort of pointing out, whoa, we're headed for another issue here nationally because that income to payment ratio is sort of artificially being declined. Here, the red flag is quite different. We have an affordability challenge here, where the income levels compared to the affordability of the homes here just don't line up like they would in other markets. Historically, nationwide, the median home price is usually, the rule of thumb is 2.6 times the median household income. Here in Brattleboro, it's 4.9 times the median income. And so those of you who hypothesize that there's an affordability issue are absolutely correct, and the number confirms that, and I don't need to go into any more detail, other than to say what we need to do as part of your team is look at how do we face this challenge and deal with this challenge. You're already doing proactive things to bridge the affordability gap. Certainly, one of the things I love about working in Vermont is that you follow the community land trust model, and the community land trusts are very innovative in how they deal with housing issues. It's a great tool. It's one that we're trying to sell to the rest of the nation. And so that's a great thing that you're doing. Another thing that we're aware of, Richard was discussing it with me this morning, is you have an incredible program with accessory dwelling units here in Brattleboro. That helps deal not just with affordability issue, but with flexibility of housing and being able to accommodate family members or singles or others that come in. Those are all really good things that are happening. There's got to be the companion, ongoing, proactive strategy to bridge the gap for people of greater means as well. Because see, what's really happening is that because of that house to income value, that young professional, that entrepreneur sees that as an obstacle to getting into this market. And so it's not only a challenge for those that have very little means, it's a challenge for those who have greater means. Because you're not a value proposition alternative for them. You're actually an increase. So they're going to have to sacrifice some of their income in order to live here, in order to afford the housing here. Some of the things that we've seen, there's some incredibly creative models. Paducah, Kentucky did an incredible thing with basically financing for artists that would give down payment assistance to artists, creative financing, and would actually finance the housing for above the market value with the assumption the artists will be putting studio space in with their living space. The other one is ourspace.org, and I encourage you to look at that. They're a national nonprofit that works with communities on developing spaces for artists to live. And they do some really creative work. And then what we're seeing nationwide is community land trusts begin to explore widening and broadening their mission to serve not only those of lesser means, but also those that they're trying to recruit, entrepreneurs and others, looking at mixed income products as well. We'll be looking more at that as we move ahead. This is the last boring slide before I turn it over to the guys with nice drawings. I just insulted my entire team. They're not going to let me live down either. At the end of the day, I want to take a step back. You know, we know there are challenges here, but you've got amazing projects going on. It is incredibly rare for us to go into a community that had a disaster like the Brooks House fire that was able to put together an extraordinarily complicated deal, and I put deal in quotes, but a complicated financial model to get a $24 million renovation in downtown on a signature corner. That is a testament to this community's resilience and its strength and the vision that you have for this downtown. A community without that kind of commitment could have easily let that building just fall by the wayside. And you saw through the vision and importance of doing that project. So I want that to be sort of a bellwether for this community as you look at additional projects moving ahead to demonstrate that if you can pull that thing off, you can repeat it. And it can happen again and again. What we're seeing too, and I'm really excited about it, is the regional efforts that are going on as far as SEVEDs and the SEDS efforts, coupled with local efforts as far as local sustainability and looking at creative ways to support the local economy. They're really combining together to bring ideas on how to reshape this economy and look at it as you move ahead into the post Vermont Yankee economy as well. And that's going to be critically important that you bring your best thinking together on this. Downtown is going to play a pivotal role in this undertaking, because what we're seeing nationwide, and I've experienced it, throughout the Southeast, as we watch textile mill after textile mill vacate our downtowns and just suck jobs out of the core of downtowns, is we're seeing these downtowns reemerge as the centers of creative activity and the centers of entrepreneurship and the centers of small business and the centers of activity. You've already got this in spades in this downtown. It's a question of how do you continue to build it. Main Street is working. The street itself is working. How do we extend the success of Main Street in downtown onto adjacent streets? And my teammates will be talking about that. And then part of what we really want to focus on too is that, and this is imperative as we deal with disaster recovery, is how do we deal with simple things that can be done day to day. It was awesome yesterday evening to see Dick DeGray and his wife out pulling up plants out of the pots to get ready to replant them with mums for the fall season. These are important projects. When I see the wall with the chalk, with people writing what their hopes and dreams are on it, these are important projects. And so having some of the simple things that you're doing that also build the confidence to do the more complex things is really important. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more, but I'd love for Tom to join me here to talk a little bit about parking and some of the overall physical planning issues. So, Tom, take it away. What's that? Yeah.
All right. So we're going to talk about some of the physical planning and design aspects of this effort. And looking in context, as Tripp said, with the big picture, some of the longer term items, I'll start with that and giving some context, and then zooming back into some of the short term things that we can focus on. We'll first start talking a little bit about some of the parking resources and issues. We're going to be delving into that a little more and setting up a framework for some more detailed parking studies that could occur as part of your downtown master plan. I want to talk a little bit about the regional trail connections. There's been some studies over the past 10 years dealing with that effort. And then a framework plan for downtown, and then ending with some general enhancements.
Currently in downtown, you have 924 public parking spaces. Of those, are about 20%, 1 in every 5, are on-street metered spaces. About 80% of those are in public lots. We heard a lot of discussion about how all that's managed and how that's dealt with. A lot of the lots, quite frankly, are not fully utilized, and several lots are very competitively utilized. So you can have lots like the Harmony lot, which is quite used, Then you have the parking deck, which has a lot of vacancy in it. So how do we look at managing some of these parking resources so that you get the most out of your parking issue? There are also significant additional private parking resources, and we'll be working with the town to begin to understand that as well. Because as you might look at 924, that number, while albeit high, certainly is not enough to sustain the space that you have. So we factor in things like the co-op, the Latchis, all of the other parking resources that are private, the banks and so forth. Those significantly increase the number of parking resources you have. We've conducted, I'll say David has conducted, through the help of the town, a detailed condition analysis of all your parking, including a rating system from excellent to poor on the condition of each of your lots and decks, along with pointers on how to rank a capital improvement plan to maintain and keep those done. And we'll be turning that detailed report over to the town to look at. I'm not going to get into the details of some of the things David talked about, like the giant crack on Lower Green Street and some other things that are going on. But it's a detailed report. And so we'll be providing that later on. And certainly the signs that you've installed are an improvement in direction to visitor parking lots, but that needs to continue to be driven home and cultivated. And Tom will talk about that in the coming slides.
Yeah, and as we work in Main Street communities all over and attend conferences, we want to just hit on some best practices that might be considered over time here in Brattleboro. This is from a conference topic at the recent Main Street conference in Baltimore. This is from a presentation from Nelson Nygaard. And a couple things that they really hit on me that resonated was that really parking in a downtown is not about the car, it's about people. It's managing people and people's experience in the downtown. Parking is a convenience to give people an access to the retail and the experiences of downtown. One of the on-street parking is your most important parking, and innovative towns are striving to maintain 80 to 90% availability of on-street parking at all times. Occupancy, so that there's always maybe 1 or 2 spaces per block that is available, and that goes into convenience. And there's the pricing strategies help help you maintain that balance. And then really looking towards an overall philosophy of park once, turning visitors into pedestrians. And there's a real opportunity here, capitalizing on the parking deck more and some of the remote lots that you have, and creating a downtown experience that's attractive, that people don't mind parking once and being a pedestrian the rest of the time. As I said, on-street parking is the most valuable, and a lot of towns and communities are managing that by doing a variable pricing and charging the higher price for the prime spots. And so if you're a cheap miser, and like maybe me, and I don't want to pay a lot of parking, I'll park in a remote lot that might be cheaper, and I like the experience of walking. But there's some people that it's very important to park out front, and that's where they might be willing to pay a higher price for some of that parking. So it comes out, and there's a balance in there. That pricing strategy helps determine how many spaces are occupied and how many are available in each block face. And that parking strategy, or the pricing, is used to force turnover in parking. A lot of communities are getting away from time limits. They're letting the customer determine how long they want to stay, and by pricing in some of the most valuable parking spaces, a higher price point will keep them from parking there all day long and just using it for convenience.
And that's one of the challenges you see here possibly is when you see price parity between on-street spaces and lot spaces, when those pricing are roughly equal to one another, the inclination is I'm going to get that prime space on the street as much as I can, whereas if there's not price parity, it's cheaper to park in a lot than it is to park on the street. You're getting that consumer to go there.
Yeah, and we heard a lot about the no parking meters not in effect on Sunday. We've heard people say they like that. We've heard people say they didn't. Generally, as soon as you take the meters off, and like if you end them at 6 p.m. or take them off on a Sunday, then that encourages potential customers to your downtown businesses for taking some of those prime spaces and parking there all day long. So these are just some things long-term to be considering, and we'll fold this in as it applies more specifically to Brattleboro in the next phase of our work. And so, parking is really about convenience. Parking further away is more acceptable to people if the experience of getting from that parking resource is clear, understandable, and convenient. If you're walking along blank walls and unshaded streets, or there's no signs telling you where to go, you're going to feel like you're parking a lot further away than you really are, versus if you're walking across active storefronts, there's a lot going on, things to see, that distance is going to be perceived shorter. So, what's really, what can hurt businesses is a core downtown environment, not so much, whether or not there's a lot of parking right in front of that business. Brattleboro has done a lot of great things, though, already. Your Main Street is very attractive. There's a lot of attention going into taking care of making that a pleasing experience, and there's an opportunity to extend that to some of the side streets. So we kind of zoom out on some of the bigger pictures. This is my first trip to Brattleboro. I came up on the train from Baltimore. It's great that there's actually a community I work in I can actually get to by train. And one of the things that impressed me is when I got off the train was I could look one way and see this incredible natural scenery, the Connecticut River, look the other way and see this very dense urban environment. I love cities, I love the forms of buildings and the composition that they create, and there was just a lot of activity when I got off the train. I walked a block and a half to my hotel. This is a tremendous resource to have the natural resources, this dense downtown immediately. And then the whetstone running through the center of town, and really looking in detail at how the whetstone brook changes character throughout, from where it's closer to the Connecticut, and then as you move further upstream, the rock formations, the walls, the interface of the architecture with the stream. Very interesting. And then, of course, you have a tremendous amount of resources, and this is phenomenal co-op, the sustainable landscape, the parking, a lot that's in place, and it really sets a model for some future development potential. And then, as Tripp mentioned, we just really love this. A lot of our work in public space deals with some of these temporal, kind of temporary exhibits that we do, things to activate spaces with really a low-cost way to activate spaces, and this participatory mural is just really great, and especially really love the positive message it's asking for on this. And then even just some of the kind of the more subtle things, we're walking along and you always see a little sidewalk square that has some public art incorporated into it, whether it's just an etching or some other insert, just these little surprises that you find throughout Brattleboro. So, I mean, I could spend an hour on all the great assets you have in here, but those are some things that really immediately resonated. We're going to take a big picture look, and before we talk about the detailed downtown, look at some more regional connections. There's some great trail access along the West River, and then also to the south, Fort Hill Branch Trail in New Hampshire. In 2002, there was a report done for the feasibility study for that missing link, the Brattleboro link, the Connecticut River Rails and Trails program. And if we look at the region, downtown Brattleboro right here, the Fort Hill Branch Trail on the New Hampshire side ends about here. The West River Trail ends about here. The feasibility study looked at extending the trail, a shorter term opportunity is extended up to the south of downtown to the depot area. There's the ability with, as the feasibility of looking at the bridge becoming a pedestrian bridge and a new bridge being built in its place, that there's a real opportunity to create a loop trail system there. So even before it connects to the broader system, there's the ability to really create a smaller loop around this wonderful resource of the river. And then lastly, connecting to the north up to the West River Trail. And the feasibility study really got into several different alternatives, the pros and cons. The most feasible seemed to be running it along the west side of the railroad. We're not able to, in our 2 days here, evaluate what's the best route to go, but the big picture is that this is a really important link to occur and to continue working to make happen. And it's really going to have, as we look at the downtown area, start to impact what happens with downtown in some more micro connections in the downtown area. And this is just further to the north. The feasibility study looked at 2 different alternative trail connections, one along the railroad and one along Wontosset Drive. I didn't get much sleep last night, so I'm not able to pronounce any words today. So as we look at our downtown area, the core area, I'll just give you some orientation. Obviously, Bridge Street, the bridge, the depot in here. All the orange colored buildings are existing buildings. Where you see red are where we talked about potential infill development or development projects that are either in the exploratory phase or early feasibility phase. The River Garden is right here, so Main Street, Elliott Street, Flat Street in this direction. The public parking resources, the parking garage, the Preston Street lot, the Elm Street lot, I think this is Spring, and then Pine Grove lot over in here. Harmony in the middle, yes, right here, and then the Brooks Hotel redevelopment in this area. So I'm going to talk about a couple things that I'm going to talk about, orient right here, and then this is, of course, is the co-op, and this is the Whetstone Brook. I'm going to talk a little bit about we met with some of the members of the New England Youth Theater, which is currently located in this building. They're exploring some expansion options on the site. We understand that there's a potential for the Brattleboro Music Center to utilize a portion of the existing church building, and then some expansion next to that is being explored. And then we talked with some property owners about some potential expansion area right in here where the Humble Kitchen currently sets up. So we'll zoom in on some of those. But I think that from a conceptual standpoint, a big picture is that it's really, you're starting to see a lot of dynamic activity happening along the Whetstone corridor. We heard a lot about making that Whetstone corridor more visible and accessible, and we have some conversations later in this presentation about some very easy ways to do that. But you see several significant projects, the Youth Theater, potential music center, the expansion of the Youth Theater occurring as a real potential anchor further down Flat Street and further to this end of town, the west end of town, with the existing park across from the depot, the museum, and then the opportunity to take the existing the capped green space here and really expand that as a waterfront park as well. I'm going to back up is one thing. And then what I wanted to talk about, the Preston Street lot right here. Some of the parking lots, there was a lot of conversation about turning some of the parking lots into permanent green space. We think some of the best strategy might be to look at the parking lots as flexible space. It could be used for event space, keep them parking most of the time, but then really keep as potential locations for events or festivals, the outdoor movies, things like that, rather than investing in a fairly significant space. The one thing we do feel as a team, we know there's been a lot of conversation about a skate park, and we know it's the current location is proposed somewhere up in this area. We know there's a lot of angst with that and different opinions with it. You know, we really feel it might be worth considering somewhere down in this location to look for the skate park. We heard a lot about youth and the youth not having enough to do, conflicts with gallery night and maybe youth loitering and hanging out, and giving them a positive thing to do, having some positive youth-related events down in the core where the action is would be worth exploring. And we'll talk more about that in the report. The first area I want to talk about is the riverfront. This is the current site of the berm, and we understand there's a significantly more berm on here than is required. And the one thing it does cut your view off to the river, and this is one opportunity where you really could get a lot of activity with the riverfront. We're showing a potential long-term, there might be a plaza, a deck space associated with the bridge, some sort of flexible lawn, green space. if this historic structure is reused, there's some interface with some outdoor, maybe dining or activity areas or outdoor classroom space with that. But to really engage, this is one opportunity where you can really engage the river, future pedestrian bridge, and then also that whetstone corridor that I showed highlighted in green earlier. And then some images of that area. And you really, as someone that really was captivated by the river, is frustrating when you're down here. You get these really tiny little glimpses. Obviously in the winter you're going to have a much clearer glimpse, but in the summer season it would be great to have a little more opportunity to interface with that river. As we move further up the whetstone, again, this is where the existing youth theater is. One of the concepts that they talked to us about was taking some of the existing parking lot that's here, moving it to where the existing building that has some environmental issues will be removed, and then building an expansion of performance space out along the street. The concept, where there's many different ways this could be developed, and this was just a quick look at some potential. One of the thoughts we had, it might be important to get the building on the corner of the street, Flat Street and Elm Street, perhaps preserve some of the parking that's in this area, replace the rest of it in this area, and then create a network trail system that links into more of an outdoor open area, has some sustainable landscape components. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And we think there's a real opportunity to explore the feasibility of a pedestrian bridge over to the co-op parking lot and perhaps a trail along the whetstone on this side. And one of the reasons we look at that is the way Flat Street bends across. When you're walking along Flat Street, you really don't see what's around this corner because of the alignment of the road. And there might be the potential to really create a stronger connection here, especially as you start to activate this waterfront edge more. Similarly, if the Brattleboro Music Center locates here with this portion of the existing building and some expansion space, we're also really starting to get a core of cultural activities in this area that really animate that waterfront. It'll be important if you look at something like this to really, all the partners need to be involved, the co-op, the institutions over here who sort of understand parking arrangements. There's a concern, obviously, that people would park here and then use these facilities and not the co-op. So there have to be some understandings, agreements agreed upon, and some enforcement of that. But it's an idea we think is worth exploring. It could really set up an exciting corridor along the whetstone. And even as some of these facilities are developed, there may be some outdoor decks or outdoor areas that overlook the creek or the brook. And this is obviously the existing youth theater, a very tremendous facility, or incorporating some of these sustainable landscape practices that we recommend continuing. But again, they're right on the whetstone. But there's a couple pruning shears could open up some views. A very easy improvement, but you can start to engage that wonderful resource that's very hidden. You just look over that, you climb through those overgrowth, and you just see this wonderful resource that can be engaged further. As we look into the core of downtown, this is the Harmony lot, this is the Brooks Hotel. This is the plan that we got from Stevens Associates, what's being looked at. Their plan, as we understand, cars would still drive through here, but the paving would be treated differently. There'd be some outdoor amenity space associated with the development, some covered parking spaces. And then we're recommending from the Conway School did a study of the parking lot, and one of the recommendations was for creating a clearer organization through there, perhaps exploring permeable paving in some of the parking stalls. We think it's really important to preserve the existing trees in there and then supplement the trees that are in poor health with additional trees, because that really is a wonderful space back there. If we look at some of the photographs, it really has a wonderful sense of space. Another great place for some festivals or events to occur. Looking at the views, the juxtaposition of architectural forms are really quite dynamic. And then this is an example, this is in my neighborhood in Baltimore, of a food truck rally that this was in the SPCA parking lot. But a place like this would be a wonderful event for something like this. Again, an impromptu event. It doesn't have to be converted into a permanent open space. But as we go back, another quick fix that could be done, this is up on the street above that lot. Again, just opening up some, cleaning out some of this vegetation and taking advantage of these views down into there. It also opens up, puts eyes on that space and makes it a little safer, keeps some of the maybe activities you don't want to not happen when you have more visibility and eyes. It also, you can take advantage of some of the views of the spires and the architecture of the mountains in the distance. As we move also in the core over to, we were asked to look at some of the buildings. Laz will have some architectural detail for some of the building next to the river garden. We were looking at some site enhancements to the river garden. We met with some of the folks involved in that. This is the existing condition. This is the outdoor deck, some large trees, and then overlooking to the river. This is the adjacent property, kind of a courtyard space, and people access to the river deck through here. We think there's a real opportunity. If this property owner wants to expand the jewelry store out the back, Laz will talk more about that. But there's a real opportunity to formalize some of these courtyard spaces, perhaps expand the river deck, the river garden deck around, keeping the existing trees, stepping down a little bit, take advantage of some of those dynamic river views, and create more outdoor gathering areas. And the adjacent property owner could also expand some decking out there, and they could be tied together and coordinated as a complex. They could work individually or together, but we think there's a real tremendous opportunity to do that, and then to look at, maybe there's some overhead string lights over this courtyard to really create a dynamic outdoor space. And these are just some of the elevation relationships of those different deck levels. Some of the other, we met with some property owners interested in looking, or some businesses interested in looking at the reuse of this building next to the parking deck. We've heard some plans for some potential infill development buildings. And we think this is a really a tremendous opportunity, activating, adding more positive activity to Flat Street. These buildings can be developed around the courtyard. We know they looked at some more detailed studies, but we wanted to look at it from more the bigger picture perspective, some opportunities for upper floors to tie back into Elliott Street as well as Flat Street, and then surround and create a dynamic courtyard space. This is a mill reuse in Baltimore, where some creative businesses reused some old mill buildings, but created some very kind of industrial courtyard gathering spaces in amongst those buildings. And some of these same characteristics could occur in this space, playing up on that industrial and warehouse theme, string lights, umbrella table. Again, not a lot of investment in a space like this, but very effective. And then even taking some of the details and some of the industrial themed elements, incorporating into design details like railings. So a lot of those are some long-term projects that are really building on some efforts that are already underway here. But I want to talk about a couple general enhancements, things that are fairly easy to do, that you're already doing, and some we think there's an opportunity to do that. One, the maintenance and beautification. We, early yesterday morning, walking up the street, we saw this gentleman from Sam's out sweeping the sidewalk. Can't stress enough how important this is, that every property owner, every business owner really has a role to play in keeping the sidewalks clean. The town can't do it on its own. One organization can't do it on it. It's everyone's responsibility. We heard several people talk about how dirty the streets, the sidewalks are in town. I've been very impressed with how clean everything is, and it's to efforts like this that are really, you're doing a phenomenal job. Dick was out busy last night changing over the baskets. Again, volunteer effort. You're so fortunate to have individuals like these that are really taking upon themselves to do work like this, and I'm sure they could really use additional support, and but this is what these little details make the community. When we talk about the convenience of walking, parking resources, when you're walking across well-maintained sidewalks and flower pots and places that people obviously care, that makes a big difference to the visitor downtown. And one of the things that I just love, that this humble cafe is just a wonderful use. Again, not a lot of investment in this, but these little pop-up uses, these are happening all over the country. pop-up uses that start to activate and turn maybe underutilized space into a very important space. It helps to incubate businesses, and then starts to get people thinking about a district differently than they currently may, and then sets the stage for future, more intensive investment in those areas in the future. Another concept we see happening a lot is the idea of the pop-up cafe or parklet. We heard a number of people talk about a desire to remove on-street parking along the core block of Main Street. We kind of all shuddered a little when we heard that. We understand the desire to expand the sidewalks into more outdoor dining space and pedestrian area, but those on-street parking spaces are so critical to the businesses, to the convenience of parking, and that customer experience. But one thing that you can do is look at, on a seasonal basis, taking maybe a couple parking spaces that the business or the downtown district that could apply for a permit and then convert it into an outdoor space on a temporary basis. And this is a bump out showing where it might be, a lot of times these are built with just wood decking, and it's done for 3 months out of the year, and then it allows tables to it. In this case, because you have a lot of truck traffic along Main Street, we would recommend that the tables then occur up against the building, and then pedestrians can move out along the edge. That's one of the reasons we would not recommend removing the parking along the street, because of the amount of traffic along there. It would not be a very desirable space, and the parked cars actually add a good transition and buffer between the pedestrian and the visitor. And these are some, this was from a parking day event. This is in our neighborhood, Nate and I's neighborhood back in Baltimore, where for one day we converted some parking spaces into outdoor cafes. On Peoria, Richard indicated on Peoria next year is one prototype of this. It would be a seasonal, maybe 4 months out of the year that they would do it there. And there's a this year parking day is September 20th, but it's a program that occurs every year. It started in San Francisco. It's an international movement. But that might be something that Brattleboro experiments with to see if the people warm up to the idea, and then you might turn it into something more extensive. But it's an easy way without making a big capital investment to get some outdoor dining. The other thing that really struck me was opening up views. I talked earlier about getting the hedge pruners out, or the shears, or the pruning saw out. There's all kinds of areas throughout the downtown where you can really take advantage of either views to the water or from higher grounds to the downtown area. When I did my morning jog the other day up, I think it's at Canal Street, up from the co-op, there's this great little series of benches along here with potentially great views of the downtown, with maybe a couple limbing up of some trees or selective removal of something that you could open up some views and make that connection to downtown. This wonderful little plaza with the flagpole right in here has great views of the downtown. This is the area I was showing above Harmony Lot, where a little bit of clearing could open that up. A river garden, again, maybe limbing up the tree that's there, could open up views. This public parking lot right here has some of the most tremendous views of the water in the city. There's right now a little wooden shed there that blocks that view, but you're looking down the length of the river, and it really, just for the people using that lot, they can be engaged with. And then on the High Grove lot, looking at the downtown and the church spires already is a great view. So, and even a little along the Whetstone, just some areas where you can open up. There's some great architectural interface with the water, clearing out some of that. And then from CEPTED to crime prevention through environmental design, there's practices of just putting more eyes on a space to keep from undesirable activity from happening. This is a great area where you did capitalize on some distant views and take advantage of the topography. This is where you have the most tremendous view of the Connecticut River ever. I first fell over the hill standing on the guardrail to take this view, and it's begging for an open view. Now, I love trees, but there are opportunities to do some selective removal to really engage people with that resource. Already you have some great views, just a little bit of elevation change from the High Grove to the spires and the architecture of downtown. And then even again, here, the fence along the Whetstone, walking up from the train station and the waterfront, there's a lot more opportunity to engage this view and encourage people to hang over that railing. This is in nearby Shelburne Falls in Massachusetts, along the waterfront, where it really took advantage here of engaging with the water, looking at the rock formations. And you're already doing that with the railing along the bridge. There's just maybe an opportunity to extend that down to the riverfront. And then the town common is just a wonderful space. Again, I was jogging, and then I got real little glimpses of some water through those trees, and then after going through and looking at the trees, the West River, just an amazing view of the West River, but you really don't feel connected to that from the town common. So every opportunity that we can engage with the water and the river is great, and it's not expensive to do that. And then, a similar situation, this is down at Smith College in Northampton, how, just the impact that makes when you engage with that water resource. The other easy thing to do is lighting. These are just some examples we found. They might not be exactly the examples you use here, but with underpasses, that you have with going over to the parking garage, where it's dark under there, and this is a creative, artistic community. Look at different ways that lighting can be used, not just security lighting, but as an art installation to make those spaces more vibrant. Lighting the facade, you have a wonderful wealth of historic architecture. The slide to the right is in Pittsburgh. That's more really something that's just a little more classic and highlights the historic architecture. Philadelphia's Arts Avenue got a little more creative in color. So there's you have these wonderful resources that you could do that. I'm going to give Brandy a chance to talk about some opportunities right here in Brattleboro for lighting.
Well, just to pick up on the theme that Tom's been alluding to, both short-term and easy things that can be done to really highlight and animate a tremendous asset in the Brookstone, the Whetstone Brook. Here, this sort of embankment adjacent to the food co-op allows us this opportunity to introduce some things. First, in a minute, you'll see the effect of some stuff. We trust you as an artistic community to figure out something that would work there. For now, we just pick something generic that might include grain that you can purchase at the food co-op, whatever. But you can pick something that would satisfy your particular niche. But the fact is, as the day moves on and darkness sets in, it affords these really great opportunities to highlight and activate and animate this particular wall. Like Tom just alluded to, you could both have lights on the building that's behind us that would illuminate the building in the background, but also some downlighting that would sort of highlight the activity of the water passing over the rocks and creating both the noise, where Stephanie, she's going to do sound effects for this slide, but as well as the visual. I mean, there's just something mesmerizing just watching the water as it passes over rocks. And then the thing about this particular perspective, in addition to the one that Tom showed, which is lower down on this roadway, is here, both as a pedestrian and an automobile in the far right lane, you can actually see some of this views that get activated. And so as it gets even darker, the drama increases even more. And again, the whole goal here is this is a tremendous asset you already have. These are just opportunities to animate it and activate it even further. This obviously is just considering a single colored light. You could sort of change them all to be a different color light. You can alternate colors. That's up to you. But the whole goal of all of this is simply to activate and animate a very significant asset that you have in your downtown.
And lighting is a relatively inexpensive thing to do, and as you talk about safety and illumination, there can be some funding available for that. Another great opportunity is just the wall back by the parking deck. We've heard a lot about just hanging out and loitering in this corner. It's pretty dark here at night, but look at the wealth of stonework in that wall. I mean, it's just quite beautiful, and I couldn't find the right image for that, but you get the sense that was downlit and really play that up as a real asset rather than a detriment. Some other things that from a general practice, as we look at all the landscape we showed some of the courtyards around the youth theater and the music center. with some along the whetstone, but incorporating edible landscapes into that. This is one that our office participated at home, and it's a really great way to involve the community, engage youth in activities, and whether it's arts and painting vacant walls or actually planting the garden and participating in growing the gardens. This is the Franklin Permaculture Garden down at Amherst. There's really a lot of attention to the whole edible landscape, and these don't have to be done in the format of a community garden. It could be an artistic ornamental landscape that happens to be edible as well. Looking at greenery, the potential for doing green roofs, incorporating them into some of the developments, especially along the whetstone, and then bioretention rain gardens. This is at Penn State's campus, but you're already doing it in the co-op and the median. It really, and this also, what it does, it puts it out front and center, and it presents the opportunities for interpretation and education, that you're constantly educating, making awareness of the importance of some of these landscapes and sustainable practices into the incorporation of development. As I said, you're doing a great examples here at the co-op, and off to the right is the rain garden that they have in the median. And then also looking at just better accommodations for bicycles in Northampton, Mass, where they maintain an occasional parking space where they have very narrow sidewalks, but using a parking space you can get 20 bikes parked in here versus one car. So really continuing to make the downtown easier for pedestrians and bicyclists. All right. Last.
Downtown Brattleboro has a wonderful collection of buildings. I mean, the architecture, there's details in them. It's really a nice, I'm from St. Albans, and I think we have a great downtown. But you guys have some wonderful buildings. And they're actually in pretty good shape. They've been taken care of. But they could really use that. So here's a couple of examples where they could use a little tender loving care, things like this. Water, once it gets into brick, causes more damage than anything. When you think of a liquid, how can it cause damage? It's just a liquid, but freeze and thawing. So little things like this, if they're taken care of early, can save major expenses when it reaches a point of this. Most of your brick is in great condition. The buildings have been taken care of, the mortar joints are tight, but some of it hasn't been done very well. Ideally, you would match the existing mortar and match the existing brick. Here we have 3 different colors, and it takes away from the character of the building. But they need a bath. It needs to be clean. And I like to use this example. This is a building in St. Albans that we cleaned. And this is where we stopped and took a break, and I took a photograph just to see the difference. It gives you a fresh face. It's like painting. Of course, you can't paint brick, but you can clean it up. And Randy and Heather did a couple of buildings to give you an example of what can happen. Sorry.
No worries.
And some of these cleaners, we don't sandblast anymore because it damages the brick. We don't use acid anymore because it etches the hardened surface of the brick and the marble. These are really detergents. They're soft, they can be pressure washed, they don't do any damage, they're easy to use, they're safe to use, they're green, but there are cleaners out there, and we had used 101 Masonry Restore when we did that building I showed you in St. Albans.
Okay. Just some visuals. Heather on our team did this particular building, a great building. You can just see the architectural character, and it's just waiting to be exposed in even greater detail. And so she just showed what it would look like if you just simply clean the brick, clean the granite lintels and sills. It could just make a tremendous difference. And again, these are very subtle changes. This building looks great as it is, but it looks even better with just, to quote Laz, a new bath. This is one that I did across the street. Again, I'm just going to look at this section from this sort of zipper and zipper detail, looking at the kitchen sink and the Vermont shop. And again, just showing the difference in just cleaning the masonry makes, cleaning the sills, the heads, and perhaps treating the awning at the Vermont shop in the same way as the kitchen sink. Again, very subtle details, but just that sort of simple facelift that a bath would give you.
And We also met with property owners, and they each came up with, they had their own issue. This is a nice little building. The owner came to us, can I put a second floor on it? I go, I have views of the river, could I put a couple apartments on it? You know, it looks almost like a two-story building. There's a two-story building next to it. It's actually one story. So they asked us, you know, here's our building. It's masonry bearing walls, it has steel columns, wood frame. Its parapets are 7 foot tall to make it look like a two-story building so it fits in on Main Street. Whoops. So when you go on the roof, you can't even see the river because the walls are, so they already have some structure they could take advantage of. So we did a cursory review of their structure. You could probably fit 2 30 by 65 apartments and have views of the back. It's about 1,800, 2,000 square feet, which is good size. They may need to reinforce their columns and their roof framing, but the bones are there. They could use them. We have to take some of the parapets, sections of it out to place windows and stuff. But the view is fantastic. You know, take advantage of it. You have this great asset here, like Tom said. Another owner came to us and said, I have this temporary structure in the back. I'd like to expand my retail. I'd like to clean it up. So we did a real quick sketch, but just to give an idea of what might happen when you clean it up, this becomes a one-story structure here with an outside living space. It just gives them an idea of what the potential is for that. And this is a project that Heather worked on. It's right next door to River Park. And the owner liked to get rid of the awnings. Can we dress up the building? How can we make it look a little better? And these are simple details. They're not expensive. They do cost money. But it's pretty simple. You know, took off the awning. She didn't want it. Maybe we do a canopy across, do her signs, redo the tile underneath, maybe put her internet access address, but simple cleanup, a little fresh paint, just cleans it up, makes it look fresh again.
Paul Levitt from New York came down. He's the owner of this building. He met with me about it, and one of my favorite things about being sort of a preservation-based architect is pretending you're Sherlock Holmes and trying to unravel the story behind it. Because if you're like me, you come and you look and you realize, all right, I'm pretty darn sure the building used to stop people. Okay? So what's going on up here? And sure enough, my hunch was partially correct because it indeed was a later addition, but not that much later of addition, which surprised me. For those of you who don't know, this building was constructed, I believe the date was 1883. But this addition was put on in the late 1800s. I was pegging it way into well into the 1900s. But the mystery for me was, why the heck is it so tall? You know, especially if you consider the space between the top of the windows and kind of the cornice and then this really tall parapet. Has anybody been on the third floor of this building? Isn't it cool? There is a ballroom up there if you did not know it. It's this really wonderful vaulted ballroom, and in the very middle, there's actually a little dome that's painted with the moon and the stars. I mean, this thing is actually pretty darn cool and explains the whole reason why there's such a massive addition on the third floor. That being said, it certainly could stand some architectural treatments that would make it more appropriate for the addition, and especially for the, shall we say, the sort of mansard appearance that it's trying to portray. So in the after photo, we'll start, you know, with the top and work down. First of all, by, you know, painting the coping a darker bronze color, it sort of diminishes taking your eye up to that point. Using replication slate like the Brattleboro Co-op, you know, we're able to pull off what was almost always, not always, but almost always the traditional treatment, finish-wise, of a mansard roof, which was the slate. And then by introducing true mansard dormer windows, we actually treat the upper facade windows appropriately. Yeah, it's kind of rough when you go back and forth. Sorry about that. I I should have prepared you for the jolt. And then, of course, I really appreciated Paul. I mean, he recognized that he has this mix mash of all these second floor windows. But before we look at the windows, just pay attention to the brickwork. I mean, back to Laz's notion, just cleaning and tuck pointing and repairing the brick makes all the difference. If we think about this as a work of art, that just prepares the canvas, for you to paint upon. And then down at the bottom, again, the current paint scheme is in no way defensive whatsoever. It's just not giving us a bang for a buck, because the frame colors are almost the same sort of tonal value as the brick itself. And so by using sort of a rust red, you really don't get a bang for the buck. And so if we take all of the structural elements, the cast iron pilasters, we're going to paint them a bronze brown, and we convert all the storefront framing to a green, which is the complement on the color wheel to the brick red. Then we sort of draw out all of those architectural details and elements that were there, but they were just sort of hiding from us. I also had the privilege to meet with the folks who are going to be occupying the river garden. And just a couple of real quick things. We didn't really compare a rendering on the inside or the front, but we gave some short and long-term recommendations. One is, if you've been in there for a meeting, it's really noisy. Both from the sound coming in from the outside as well as just reverberant noises on the inside. And so by hanging banners, you can accomplish a lot of things. You introduce color, you can introduce branding, you can introduce, in their case, sort of the educational mission and featuring agriculture, whatever the products, but it also has an acoustic value to attenuate sound as it bounces off the walls. You can also stream them up through the rafters, kind of in this configuration. It also gains a lot of heat, coming through the skylight. There's a product called Calwall, and we're only talking about the gable portions, but by using a product like that, you can reduce almost 80% of the solar heat gain transmission, but you allow almost all the light to come through. And if you can simply, have a few of the clear story windows become operable, then you can also allow some of that heat gain to escape. On the outside, again, short term, as Nate showed in this model and Tom talked about, in this foreground, if we could just introduce a bunch of cafe tables with brightly colored awnings, it sort of diminishes the whole, kind of softens the look of it being kind of a mall, for lack of a better word. And then if we could introduce, we already have some planners out here, but if we think about more planners in sort of low, medium, and high, again, anything we can do to sort of break up the sound that's coming in from the roadway toward it would be a positive thing. And a very long-term thing, this is a low priority, but if you ever really wanted to, something that would really help is, for some reason, this gable actually protrudes out from the face of the building, unlike any of the other buildings on the block. And if you could remove just that one section, just back to the joint where it's flush, that may be helpful. You could also hang some banners from this frieze. On the outside itself, this was the courtyard that Tom and Nate illustrated when he talked about this one might step down to a lower deck, as well as this one might be extended. And so this is just an illustration, again, going back to this whole notion of, we don't want to remove trees, but we just want to limb up and create some views and then frame some views to the river and the bluff beyond. Then you can sort of achieve this sort of effect. So just some ideas for the river.
Kind of gone over. I'm going to wrap up because we've talked about a lot of ideas. We have 2 upcoming trips. We're beginning to focus on some of the important things like organization and funding. Stephanie, who's on our team, will be dealing with a lot of the funding issues. But, there's a lot of opportunities out there. You're already taking advantage of them. One of the neat things about the Brooks House is that you've basically cobbled together just about every possible financing technique known to man in order to get that project done. And once you've done the most complex project, you can replicate that again and again with more simple projects, whether you're using state, historic, federal tax credits. There's a facade tax credits available to the state. New Markets tax credits, all of downtown Brattleboro qualifies for New Markets tax credits. The investment tax credits, the renewable energy program. I mean, there's the elevator program. You name it, these things are out here. That's part of what we'll be looking at as we look ahead on steps and implementation. We'll be back here in October, and then we'll be back here in December working with you all on some of those details. In addition, you're at an incredible transition point in the community. Building Development Brattleboro is looking at hiring a staff person. You've got new staff coming on board in all the different leadership organizations, and so that's going to really present an interesting dynamic as new board members come on board, the new coordinator comes on board, the sale of the River Garden to a partner organization, which was a victory for the community. Everyone sort of wins. And at the end of the day, it's merchants is where all the great downtown organizations and programs begin. So sort of getting back to the core of that and then building back that strength, building your events that are already strong, and then facilitating those partners to help flesh out that and growing this program over time. Leanne and Stacy will be back in October to deal with event organization issues and really delving deeper into that, as will some of our other team dealing with some of the parking issues that we talked about earlier. So I'll wrap up with what's next. Pretty much already just said. A couple of follow-up visits. Certainly we'll be doing our best to make this presentation available within the next day or so, so that you can watch it on YouTube. With that, I know we've gone over, but I would be happy to have the lights come up. We want to thank you for all your input that you gave us, and we're eager to hear your thoughts or comments as a result. Our team can certainly do our best to answer any questions you may have. So.
Yeah, awful lot of good ideas. And one thing that disappoints me is not enough about energy and sustainability. I realize you have some elements of the, rain garden, edible gardens, but what about looking at roofs for possibilities for solar? What about placement of charging stations? There'll be more and more money. Tourists have electric cars and that sort of thing. I would like to have seen more of that in the...
Exactly, and we'll be adding into the report, the detailed report that we did. We're here with a day and a half and trying to condense this into an hour, but we will be developing that. That's a very good point. We'll be adding that into the report. Thank you.
Early on when there were economic things you were putting up about housing trends and things like that, I think it was the PLA or TLA, it was the
Primary trade area.
Primary trade area. Did that include 05301 or was it only the town surrounding 05301?
No, it was 05301 plus Marlboro plus one other adjacent communities. I mean, two adjacent zip codes that are itty bitty. For all practical purposes, it's the 05301.
It was 05301.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I had a few questions about the economic data that you showed at the beginning. Particularly, what's the basis of all that data? I mean, you presented it quite concretely. And particularly the difference of how are you fleshing out the difference between spending side of the analysis and the sales side of the analysis? Right.
We ran two different spending and sales sides. The methodology that goes into that, we use both Esri and Nielsen to provide our research. Esri and Nielsen both use a consumer expenditure survey for your spending patterns, and they use the Census of Retail Trade coupled with state sales tax data on the sales side. And that's why it comes out concretely, but before I presented that, I said, please put some seasoning on this data before you digest it, because we have to be careful about reading that, particularly that more detailed chart. You've got to be careful about reading that as just the gospel. And so I always try, and especially in the written report too, I have a big fat paragraph on use these numbers, but use them with caution, because particularly when we drill down to a smaller geography, they become less and less reliable over time. And actually, in some of the reports, there's actually a reliability factor that I'll be able to incorporate so that you can understand what the variation may be for those purposes. And I think it's important that you ask the question, because there is a methodology that goes into it. I'm consuming the data. Having done a lot of these, I also there are things that are red flags, and I'll look at it and go, whoa, something here is goofy. And so certainly we'll point out some of those things when they occur. Yes, ma'am.
I'm amazed at how much you guys got done in such a short period of time. And it's something that I thought of actually that didn't come up at the meeting that I was at, and hasn't come up in your slides, is as we're talking about and the different plans that you were talking about, Sebets and all of that, it's all about bringing more people to work downtown. And we have a parking issue, and parking came up a lot. And You mentioned the trails, which is an important aspect, and it's something that Keene and Northampton have that have really used to make those downtowns much more vibrant and usable. We really need a real good public transit system within the town of Brattleboro. You know, it's not really that usable for people who are commuting. And if you want to bring more people downtown and you want to have people spending money downtown, you've got to have places for the people who are coming in that are visiting to park, and for the people who are working to be able to use public transit as a mode of, you know, getting to and from work. So I just wanted to raise that because I noticed that it didn't show up in the plan and it didn't come up in the meeting. It's really important because it's not usable right now for commuting.
Great point, and actually, it's funny you mentioned it because in meeting with all the people we did, it didn't come up, but certainly it's something that's top of mind. It relates back to the comment on sustainability issues too, because you know public transit also can help attenuate some of the issues of all these people coming in individual cars. And what we're seeing also with visitors too is circulators and things like that that actually can help during peak visitor time, where you've got transit that's not only serving the local population but the visitor population. So that could be something that we can look into as we move ahead. Our scope doesn't allow us to look at sort of a regional, you know, transit issue, but we definitely want to pull
But
that
even
in.
from a local, because Brattleboro, you know, there's the regional system, which is
Right.
actually fairly well used. The river corridors between Wilmington and here, and you know, north along the Connecticut River, the park and rides. There are actually quite a few people who use those.
Right.
But the local system, it's usable for people who need to get to medical appointments or, you know, but if you have to be at work at a certain time, and then you're leaving work at a certain time, the buses stop, they don't run often enough, they're too long a turnaround time, and actually they've gotten less functional in the last year because they've changed the schedules. So from the perspective of being able to figure out how to get more funding to be able to create a real public transit system within the town of Brattleboro. And again, a lot of the employees, while some of them are coming from outside of town, a lot of them are in town. And if you can figure out a way to get those people who are not in walking distance to not be able, and they don't want to have to pay for parking. They would love to not have to pay for parking. So, and then that frees up parking spaces. I mean, we've got the colleges coming into town, we've got you know, and again, this whole drive for young professionals, entrepreneurs, infill in town, which is great to bring more people working. But you have to figure out where those cars are going to go.
Yes, sir.
Recalling your speaking on pop-up cafes, were you thinking of itinerant food vendors?
I'm sorry.
Itinerant food vendors, sometimes known as food trucks?
We didn't necessarily, I mean, the one we were thinking of specifically was where, like for example, Frederick, Maryland, and I think in Montpelier, the model is a restaurant could apply for a permit that they would then, you know, pay for that, what that parking would have yielded for, say, a 3-month period, and extend the area for their outdoor tables. New York City and some other communities actually do it where, since you're building this cafe space in the public right-of-way, those tables have to be available to anyone. And, you know, different communities follow different models. So we weren't necessarily thinking of food trucks in that example. It was really for a way for existing businesses to expand their outdoor dining area.
If I may ask a follow-up question then, what's your take on, this has been a problem, this is a problem in some remote downtowns for the brick and mortar restaurateurs, which is that, excuse me, the itinerants come in to skim the peak business, but aren't there having to cover their overhead when business is normal or below normal, because that tends to be the way it is around here. What's your take on allowing these people in?
Well, I think generally the food truck business has been a very exciting trend in cities, but for example in Baltimore, I know the issue you mentioned is a concern in any community that has a vibrant food truck culture. One of the things, there's an organization in Baltimore that has a food truck party, they call it, that what they do is they locate periodically in areas that kind of underserved areas or areas that you're trying to bring more attention to investors. Maybe it's an underutilized parking lot or a park of town, and that's been very effective in bringing exposure to a neighborhood and some businesses and things like that. But the city's working through regulations about relationships with bricks and mortar.
And we're seeing that happen repeatedly in other communities where they're dealing with just how to handle that issue. We definitely would not recommend having use a hammer to solve the problem and say we need to ban itinerant vendors. I mean, you've got one on Flat Street that's already operating, and what that's doing is actually adding to the vitality of that section when that vendor is there. I haven't seen them there operating in the evening. I don't think they're cannibalizing dinner space, but they maybe are getting some folks at lunchtime. But that's a space that otherwise would be completely underutilized at that point in time when that thing is there.
I've also heard of graduated programs. So, for instance, the food truck rally that Tom showed, that might be a way where a community starts, where in the Harmony lot or some concentrated space, it might happen once a month or every other month, where vendors are invited in, and there's other activity that happens in conjunction with those pop-up vendors. But then a town may develop an ongoing program, and a vendor may have to purchase essentially the rights for a parallel parking space in downtown, and that would go towards funding downtown improvements, beautification, that sort of thing.